Welcome back to another episode of my podcast, Defeating the Darkness, True Crime Stories with Downtown Heather Brown. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Heather Brown, the host of this podcast. I'm a former prosecutor here in Orange County. I was in the sexual assault unit for 10 years and the homicide unit for 5 before I retired. And now I am the host of this podcast. And today I'm super, super excited. I've been calling him out on every other episode saying, Murphy, I want you on my show. Murphy, I want you on my show. And he has graced us with his presence today. Today we have with us Matt Murphy, former homicide prosecutor, TV star, author, and one of the big things I want to talk about today is his new book that he has written. It is called The Book of Murder, and it is on sale right now at Barnes & Noble. They're offering 25% off until when?
Tomorrow.
Until tomorrow. So you got to get your copy. It's really an amazing book, and we're going to hear all about it today on the podcast and get to know Mr. Murphy a little more. For those of you who don't know him, Matt Murphy. Oh, I can't believe that you blessed me, graced me with your presence here, because I know you're a very busy man, and it's hard to even get you on the horn, Murphy.
Yeah, the truth is, when Heather tells me to do something, I've learned long ago that I just have to do it. So she's like, Murphy, you're coming on my podcast. And it's like, okay.
And so here you are. Thank you so much. I know you drove far to come down here to be on this podcast. And let's just talk a little bit about you, Murphy. Our journey together, if you will, started long ago, back in 1998 when I started. I know you started in the DA's office before me. When did you start? In the 1900s?
So I started, this in the 1900s, also known as the olden days. I started with the office in 1992 as a junior law clerk and worked my way up and became a senior law clerk. And then all I wanted to do was be a DA, right? So I got in, did misdemeanors, went to juvie for a year, did more misdemeanors, went on to what's called the felony panel. And did we meet when I was on the panel in West? Was I on the panel? No, it was when I was in sex.
You were in the sexual assault unit, and I literally, you had some investigators that were in the library waiting for you, and you were working on this crazy case. And I made the terrible mistake of asking, what's the sickest thing you guys have ever seen? Don't ever ask that question unless you want to be horrified and not sleep for days.
Well, sexual assault is a different thing, right? It's like a big giant like fraternity of women and men in law enforcement that did that, like, and the detectives and the prosecutors, everybody gets exposed to the same stuff. And end of my first week in sexual assault, you get a caseload, right? It's put on your desk and you read through it and you're horrified by the end of the first week. And for me, I'm like, that's it. There can't be anything left in the universe of human depravity in a sexual context that I have not seen in this week. And then 4 years later, when I moved out, you did longer than I did in sex.
10.
I walked out going, all right, I've only scratched the surface of how freaking weird and awful human beings can be when it comes to sex crimes. But yeah, so inside story about your host, she was a misdemeanor deputy back then. And I had the corner office, the only corner office I think I've ever had, and in Westcourt, and it was Heather and a bunch of these young 25-year-old female prosecutors, and all I would do, it was me and a bunch of these women, and I would hear them every Monday making fun of their dates from the weekend.
This is before my husband.
Yeah, and they were all,
but I'm confident
they were all legitimately single, and they would come back on Monday and be like, and they all had nicknames for the guys that they were dating, and one of them, I'll leave the name of our friend who went on a date with this guy, but in the middle of dinner, apparently, as the story goes, and I'm in my office working, and I hear them laughing hysterically, probably this one in the library, which was just about 15 feet away, and this poor guy was so nervous because he was at dinner with our friend that he inhaled a piece of steak. And they're like, he's the choker, and so he got the nickname the choker because she basically had to do the Heimlich on him, and the poor guy was embarrassed as could be. And then and I thought, and I commented, I'm like, that's just terrible that you guys are making fun of this poor guy. And he really liked her. And that was one of our good friends. Like, she's super sweet, really nice person, but it's like, the rest of them were ruthless. And then like 2 weeks later, do you remember what happened? They go on a date. And she fell down a flight of stairs, which was pure karma, because they made fun of this guy, and she goes tumbling down the stairs. And it's like, that's right. The universe strikes back, and karma is a. Am I allowed to swear on this?
You can swear.
Can I say bitch?
You can say bitch.
Karma's a bitch. Karma's a bitch, baby. And
I know.
they all made fun of him. They all laughed, and she went tumbling down the stairs. She wasn't hurt. But,
she did. She fell down like at the Hollywood Bowl, like 4 flights of stairs.
Yeah. So on behalf of all men who've ever been on dates and been nervous, it was like,
he didn't choke because he was nervous, Murphy.
He choked because he was nervous.
No.
Well, he choked at dinner and almost died. And yes, she had to do it.
I thought the funny part, it was serious at the time. Obviously, we laughed afterwards, only because like, what a horrible first date, right? But nobody was helping her, and she didn't know, like, she was screaming like in the restaurant, help, he's choking, and no one did anything. And so this was why we were laughing and teasing her, was she stood up. I go, what'd you do? She goes, I said, I don't know how to do this. I might break a rib. And I'm like, you gave a lawyer disclaimer before you saved the guy's life. And she's like, I had to. I don't know what I'm doing. So she did. She gave him the Heimlich, dislodged the piece of steak. He should have cut it smaller, for the record.
Okay.
And yeah,
so that's why everybody was laughing, because of that?
No, we were laughing because she gave a lawyer disclaimer before saving his life.
And then we go from that to the nickname, the choker.
We did. Yeah, we named him the choker because she said she wasn't going to go out with him again. And I was like, you have to. She had already decided she didn't want to date him again because he wanted to travel the world and she wanted to get married. Okay. Like, she was looking for a guy who wanted to settle down and get married. And the first thing out of his mouth was like, oh, I want to travel the world and run around and surf everywhere.
First thing out of his mouth after the aspirated piece of steak, you mean? After the second, so it's technically the second thing out of his mouth.
It was. The first thing out of his mouth was how he didn't want to get tied down to any girl. Then he choked, and then she fell down the flight of stairs. That's how it went. So we did name him the choker, Mr. I'll send you diamonds and never call you. You know, we had a lot of nicknames. But she's very happily married now.
She is.
I'll report.
She is.
As am I.
She's
what about you, Murphy? Are you married? That's what the listeners want to know.
I am not married.
Not married. Single.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not like on Tinder or any of those dating apps?
Not on any of the apps.
Okay.
I'm not married. I do not have kids. I was kind of married to the job.
You were married to the job. Let's talk about your job. So, Murphy, I know you don't know much about my podcast, so I'm going to tell you, and for anyone listening, the whole theme of my podcast, okay, is called Defeating the Darkness. And I have come to realize, in the midst of the darkest times, right, you either have to find the light to get out of the darkness. And oftentimes the light shines the brightest in the darkest places. And so we worked in the underbelly, and you know, being in homicide, especially for how many years were you in homicide?
17
years in the homicide unit, and seeing everything that you've seen, and, you know, along the way, and the depravity of man that you just spoke about, right? You were a source of light to people and victims of crime in their darkest time. And so I miss being surrounded by all those people as prosecutors, that, you know, the camaraderie, the sharing the stories, and you can just feel the light within everybody, because you're working tirelessly as a prosecutor to help victims of crime. And then the thing that I realized is, once people retire and leave the office, that your light hasn't dimmed. You're still out there trying to bring light to the darkness. And so I guess the theme of my podcast is, if you can't find the light, be the light. And I want to bring on and showcase for Orange County, I want to talk about our crime stories because everybody loves a good crime story, right? And the people that were involved in shining the light into the darkest times. So you obviously came to mind, Murphy. You're one of those people that you did this in the homicide unit. You were a light for me and a mentor for me, and I thank you profusely for that. Nobody can cross-examine an expert witness better than you, Murphy. It's a magical power that you have that I don't even think anybody sees it coming, can realize it until it's happening. And even after, you make it seem so easy, but it is true, utter brilliance. And I don't puff smoke up your ass too often, Murphy, because, we don't want his head to get big because all the ladies are fond of Murphy. But on a professional level, I've never seen anybody more talented and skilled in the courtroom in cross-examining expert witnesses or defendants on the stand. And you truly were a great mentor to me. So thank you. That's enough of the nice things I'll say about you. But you were in the homicide unit for 17 years, right? How long were you a DA?
26. So I did just shy of 4 in sexual assault. So for 21 years, I was doing sexual assault and murder in a vertical capacity. So the vertical unit basically means you start at the beginning and you finish it all the way through. So you go all the way up. That's where the word vertical comes from. So in homicide, what Heather and I would do is you get assigned a certain patch of the city. So when a murder happens, you get the phone call in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day, whenever it is, you team up with your investigator and you go to the murder scene and you follow the case all the way up. So stepped over quite a few dead bodies over the years. But as far as the cross-examination thing, thank you for being so kind on that. You talk about the darkness. We worked with people that were so talented that they were just naturals at it. And when it came to cross, I never felt like I was. You talk about the dark. When a murder happens, the worst thing that can happen to any of us in the course of our lives as humans, I think, is the loss of a loved one. Right? That's 100%. The worst thing. And everybody will experience that if we live long enough, and it's horrible. The worst of the worst is when we lose a loved one because they've intentionally been taken from us. And that's murder. And that's the worst thing that any human being can ever experience. And the worst of the worst of the worst is when that person gets away with it, when a murderer gets away with it. So the first thing I'd always do after going to the crime scene and filing charges is I would always meet with the victims' families and give them my personal cell number so that they knew that there was somebody who cared. But when you do that and you sit down with the family member and you sit down with the mom and there's a word, it's like a 10-cent word, but it just seems to fit. It's apoplectic grief is what those poor moms deal with. Like a mother's grief or a father's grief when their child has been murdered by somebody who's now doing everything they can to get away with it, to lie about it and all that. You, especially when you were at the scene, you understand the enormity of your responsibility as a prosecutor. So I never felt like I was never one of those that was naturally good at cross. It's one of those things that at 2 a.m. when you're in the middle of trial and you're working on a week of 4 hours of sleep, and there's that period of time where you're back at the podium at 9 a.m., which means for me, with my commute, I was going to be up at 5:30 or 6. And when it's 2 a.m. and you're starting to weigh that, am I going to be a zombie the next day versus am I going to read one more article on this expert and maybe then I'll find the nugget? I would always, it wasn't so much that I had the talent. I think it's that I had the sheer desire on behalf of the family to make sure that the lying son of a bitch didn't get away with it. Because a lot of experts, as we know, forensic psychologists who come in and testify on behalf of defendants, some of them are really good and some of them are really honest, but a lot of them aren't. A lot of them are, they're making money based on, coming in and essentially selling their opinion on behalf of child molesters and rapists and murderers. And I just always had a problem with that. So I'd always, at 2:00 when I was exhausted, I would read that last article, and that's always when you seem to find the nugget. And so I might have looked good the next day, but it wasn't from talent. It was from, that refusal to give up on the case. That's what I would do at 2 a.m. Which, when it comes to relationships, the reason why I never got married is that's super great for people that you're dating or you're married to when you're up at the last serial killer I tried with Scarborough. That was an Andrew Urdialis case, and that took us 6 months with Ken Morrison and Denise Gregg, and they put on 5 experts on that. And the thing about expert witnesses from the defense, especially in a death penalty case like that, is if any of them get through the net, you lose. If they get just one juror who believes that the bullshit that they're saying, you lose, and the family loses. And in that case, he had so many victims. We had a courtroom full of bereaved sons and fathers and family members, and we just that's the job of a prosecutor that nobody really knows. That's behind the scenes.
I don't think that people realize that oftentimes you're working on fumes. You really don't have any more gas in the tank, because we need sleep, and your brain needs sleep to function properly. And when trial is a young man's game, because when you're younger, it's a lot easier to function on low sleep. For us old,
yeah, that's harder when you're 50 doing that. But also the thing is that with the experience, at 50, you've had that courtroom moment 100 times at that point, where you understand that the work is going to make the difference, and
makes all the difference.
I went up against defense lawyers that were insanely talented. I mean, really, really good. They were funnier than me. They were smoother than me. They were, they dressed better than me. Not that, our vast salary from the county didn't put us in beautiful clothing, and that, of course, is a joke. But better dressed, smoother, funnier. But what I could always do in my trials is I always felt like I could outwork them, and I always did. And with expert witnesses, you never know what you're looking for until you find it. And for some reason, for me, it's always that one extra article that they wrote, and at 2 a.m, and that's when it was like, wait, am I losing it from lack of sleep, or does this quote destroy everything he's testifying to? And that was always really fun too. And that's I'm writing a second book right now. I just started, and I'm going to get more into the cross-examination of experts. And
oh wow,
yeah. And the fun thing is, you never know what you're looking for till you find it. But when you wind up with a judge that trusts you a little bit, gives you a little bit of latitude, and a detective, you can have a lot of fun with some of those experts.
I've seen you do it, and it is fun to watch. I wish that we could show videos of your cross-examinations.
I had a guy named Dr. Richard Adler on that case, and he was testifying about fetal alcohol, and he's a psychiatrist. And I had a clip of him from some conference that he had done, where I was just trying to impress upon the jury, how how fetal alcohol impacts people. And my guy Andrew Urdialis was successful. He's in the Marine Corps. He was a radio man in the Marine Corps for an artillery battalion, which is very, precision is very important. And I just wanted the jury to get a sense of what actual fetal alcohol means. And this guy in this conference, what he said, and these aren't politically correct terms, but he said at the conference, people suffering from fetal alcohol behave like they are mildly mentally retarded. That's what he said. So I've got this clip of him, and I just in case I loaded it up on my PowerPoint, and I was, the best thing you can always do is you turn the defense expert into your own expert. And I didn't know that this guy was going to fight me like he did, and I don't know. So I'm going to give him a chance to be honest. And it's like, hey, would you agree that people suffering from fetal alcohol behave like they're mildly mentally retarded? And he kind of winced when I said it. He's like, can you repeat that? I'm like, would you agree? And I'm quoting him. Would you agree that they're mildly mentally retarded? He's like, we don't use that word, sir. We don't use that as degrading to the handicapped.
By we, do you mean you?
We don't use that. Well, let me see if you recognize this. And I press play, and it's him at a podium going, people with fetal alcohol syndrome behave like they're mildly mentally retarded. So I got to pull my Jeff Spicoli from Fast Times at Ridgemont, Ohio with Mr. Hand. It's like, so you use that term, and since I'm at the podium, I just use that term. So we do use that term, don't we? That was one that you just never know what's going to happen in trial.
Never know.
But again, that was a 2:00 in the morning thing. One of my law clerks found that as we're prepping for that, and it wound up just being a home run moment. So a lot of that. There's a famous golfer. gosh, I'm blanking on his name, but his quote was funny thing about practice is the more I practice, the luckier I get. Or funny thing about luck is the more I practice, the luckier I get. Ben Hogan, I think, said that. And anyway, it's the same thing. The harder you work in those trials, the luckier you seem to get on cross-examination, and at the podium, it's like, wait, did he just scold me for using a word that I have him right here?
The jurors love those moments.
Oh yeah.
They're waiting for those moments in every trial, and they come along not as often as we'd like them to, but when they do, oh boy, is it fun.
Yeah, it is really fun. But at the end of the day, that's what being a prosecutor is really all about. It's about trying to bring justice to victims' families, and a lot of people don't understand that. And when you get up to the level of sexual assault, or especially homicide, every one of us had an offer at some point by some defense lawyer or some plaintiff's firm to go into private practice and make a boatload of money. And when you reach that level in Orange County, for your listeners, there's about 3 million people that live in Orange County. There's only 8 or 9 prosecutors in the homicide unit at any given time. So it's a pretty elite group, and it's something that you and I aspired to be for years. But you get up there, and everybody up there has had an offer at some point to make money to go to the other side or to do something else. And everybody that's in there, like for my era, like Howard Gundy and Mike Murray and Cameron, the Cameroon and Dennis, we'd all had offers, and everybody decided to stay at that point because they were motivated by something else. And I think for a lot of them, it was that desire for the fight against the bullshit of, these horrible, a lot of murders are situational, right? It's like 2 drunk neighbors arguing over a fence, or 2 idiots in a bar, or Watson murders, which are DUI murders. But for those that aren't, for those where it's a planned killing, like those are some really terrible people doing the worst thing. And, it was actually a huge privilege and an honor really to be able to fight for those families, but.
Well, we're certainly glad that you did, Murphy, for so long, not just as your colleague, as a member of Orange County, and just as a human being, because we got to have people willing to fight the good fight. And you were one of those people, and I just respect the hell out of you for doing that.
Well, you're right there next to me. You're literally right next to me. We tried my very last jury trial. We did it together. We did the Hussein Nairi case as co-counsel, one of the craziest cases ever.
That was crazy. There's been more like documentaries and docuseries.
Yeah. Hulu's coming out with a 3-parter on that case.
Oh wow!
Yeah. You interviewed with them for that. Yeah. So the Hulu is hopefully going to breathe some light on that, you'll love this. So they wanted to do. I guess I don't know if I should be saying this publicly yet, but I hope they're not mad at me. But they wanted to do B-roll. So B-roll is when you just walk around, and it's like those pictures on like the shots of the prosecutor on the 2020s and stuff as they're going through their computer or like looking through papers. It's like Zoolander, they're like, hey, can you look through some papers like you're working? And it's called B-roll, or walking in or out of the office. It's the most awkward thing ever. But they wanted B-roll of me surfing. So, summer has been beautiful. And this was last week, and we go down, and it is the worst day. It's cloudy. It's like 1 foot. The surf is terrible. And I'm like, hey guys, and it's a crew from New York. It's like, I think that the surfing is going to be better tomorrow. But they're on a budget and a schedule and everything else. They're like, no, this is great. It's gloomy. And anyway, so
you got gloomy. There's going to be gloomy B-roll. Murphy, I expect so much more out of you.
Oh well, I know. I needed better.
I'm so disappointed.
But here's the thing though, to surf like 2 like tiny little itty bitty cold gray waves that morning, technically I was still getting paid, which makes me a pro surfer.
Oh, so I'm
now a pro surfer. So when you talk about Kelly Slater or Gabriel Medina, they are my colleagues because I got paid to go surfing. So.
All right. Well, I love that. Well, you surf. Not only do you surf, but I see 1,000 videos on your Instagram of diving, right? That's one of your passions as well.
Yes. Yeah. Shark diving.
So I know when I was in the sexual assault unit, especially, and I had been in trial for a month, and sometimes you told me, you've been in trials for 6 months long. I've only had one, I think the longest was 4 months, but And that was a homicide case, and mostly because COVID hit in the middle of it. But you're all in when you're working, and then you're all off then you go on vacation and you go to these glorious places to surf and scuba dive. And does that really take you away from thinking about the cases?
Yes, for sure. So physical distance seems to help a lot when you're in a different time zone. It also helps because there's nothing you can do about whatever's happening at home. And we do this boat trip to Indonesia every year with a bunch of my buddies where you are off the grid. Like there's a chain called the Andaman Islands, which is where they still have uncontacted tribes, literally. And that's, we're not quite that far west in the archipelago, but it's the same island chain. So it is middle of nowhere. And every time they set up a cell tower, the locals canoe out and steal the copper wiring to sell it for scrap. We've heard of that before. And so anyway, the cell phone tends not to work in these areas, and you're truly off the grid. And when you do that, it really helps. It really helps me anyway. I'm able to sleep. I don't sleep when I'm here. But I'll tell you another thing is that diving with sharks, when you're diving without a cage and you're at someplace far away and there's a big shark that swims up to you, you are not thinking about anything else. I mean, it is like it commands your absolute full attention. And sharks, by the way, they get a bad rap. When you're down there with them, especially with tanks on, you're 9 feet long, you're blowing bubbles, they don't know what you are. And most of the time, especially with the GoPro, it's just, hey, can you come a little closer so I can get a better shot? But yeah, that really helped me balance things out a lot, and not having kids too. I think a lot of people that did have families in the unit with us, they really use that. I know you did. Like they can shift gears into being a parent that requires sort of the same thing. It requires all their focus at the time, and I think that puts it all in perspective. It's, in a way, having a family was a perspective that I didn't have when I was for all those years that we did that job, because in a weird way, my family in those trials was the victim's family. A lot of times, they'd call me at night, and and for the moms, in particular the moms, they just get to me, and I'll tell you what, at the end of a case that nobody else wants to do, one that people have passed on, like the Kathy Torres case, that case got rejected again and again. And that was a beautiful young woman who was murdered by her boyfriend in 1994, Sam Lopez. And that was the one I tried against Lou. And, when you have you get something like that goes on, and the mom hugs you at the end, it makes it all worth it, I think.
Makes it all worth it, huh?
Yeah.
So, on that note of family, you were talking about, you didn't have a family while you were, trial warrior or whatnot. And I obviously did. We have 3 children, and it was a struggle. It was a struggle. And I do think that my kids were exposed to a lot of things that not everybody's, children are exposed to. For example, I had this homicide case where a man was shot, and he was, brain dead, but he was an organ donor. So they were keeping him alive artificially so that they could harvest his organs. And I couldn't file the charges until they had harvested the organs and he was pronounced dead. And so, because it wasn't a murder yet. And so I'm at lunch with my friend and my daughter, who was probably about 9 at the time. And my friend was getting annoyed because I was texting about work, and which happens a lot, as you know. And my husband would get annoyed too. But you can't stop the wheels of justice from moving, even if they do move slowly. But so I was sitting there texting. My friend was like, what's up? HB, like, we're eating lunch here. And so I was like, I'm sorry, but I'm waiting for them to harvest this guy's organs. And my daughter looks at me and was like, harvesting organs, Mom? Like, I'm trying to eat here. And, I've just had a lot of things along the way where, my kids have been exposed to things that other parents, children haven't been exposed to. So it's a double-edged sword, Murphy.
It's a double-edged sword.
And when you're gone and you're up and you're thinking, and when you're with your children, you're very distracted. Even when you're there, you're not really there because, as you said, you never sleep. I want to ask you about that. When you're here, you don't sleep.
No, I sleep like a baby for about an hour, and then it's all over.
You waking up to pee because you're too old or what? No. Is it because your mind's racing?
I wake up, if my brain turns on, it's over.
It's over for me too.
So I'm up from about, most mornings, it's like up from about 1 to 4 usually, or sometimes 2 to 6. If my brain turns on, like in my private practice right now, I'm devoting more and more time to the defense of police officers. And I've got a case right now in LA County with a guy who is, he's a 15-year veteran police officer who was on the job, and they go to a stolen car, and stolen car call out, and he's opening the door thinking that he's just looking for a punched ignition. No indication that there's any violence involved, no indication that there's any danger. They're in a Ralph's parking lot late at night, and he opens the door, which is arguably not the best tactics, but he's face to face with a documented gang member who's a suspect in a murder case at the time. Gang tattoos all up down the neck, and in his lap is what appears to be a sawed-off shotgun. And it turns out later it's a pellet gun, but it looks, the stock has been modified, the barrel is between his legs, and my guy had to make this split-second decision because the bad guy does this, and then he does this. And he moves his hands, and he's probably going to take the seatbelt off. But in my guy, who's got 2 little kids of his own, he sees this and he shoots. And so he gets cleared in 2018 under Jackie Lacey. And then George Gascon comes in, and my guy's white. The gang member was not. And we're off to the races. He's been indicted for a homicide. And so it is one of those things where that is now, like I left homicide, I left sexual assault, and I had about 3 months where I had nothing heavy, and it was wonderful, and I slept like a baby. And now, this guy is a devoted husband. He's a good cop, and he's innocent. And they've indicted him for voluntary manslaughter. If he goes to prison, he's going to get murdered. So yeah, I wake up in the morning when I think about him a lot, and plus I just like the guy so much. And it's a different thing when somebody's, it's a death penalty case for all intents and purposes. And I'm up against George Gascon in LA. Like, George Gascon has brought in a special prosecutor on that case. And he is, like, Gascon is a Soros-backed ideological lunatic who hopefully is about to lose. He's got a challenger, and he's got a good challenger, and a guy named Nathan Hochman who's going to run against him. But that's the madness of Southern California right now. And I wake up every morning worrying about this case and thinking about stuff. But that's from years and years of doing that when you're in trial. When that's another thing, you always have that thought at 2 a.m. And Lou Rosenbluth told me, always sleep with a pad of paper, not a computer, not a screen, but a pen and a pad of paper, so that when you wake up, if you write down all your thoughts, you can relax and go back to sleep. That's what Lou used to do. So we didn't invent the waking up in the middle of the night thing. It's funny though. Lou's wife, who passed away a few years ago, Carrie, she was my dentist. And I went in, Brian Gerwitz turned me on to her, who's another friend of ours. I walked in, I'd never met her before. And I go in for my first appointment with my new dentist, and she takes one look at my teeth. She knew it was a DA, but she takes one look and she goes, "Well, I can tell what unit you're in because I grind so much. And I grind in my sleep. I have to wear one of those freaking guards.
Night guards.
Yeah. Otherwise, I don't think I'd have any teeth left."
Oh,
yeah.
It's brutal. Wow. A lot of commonalities we have, Murphy.
Yeah.
I wake up in the middle of the night all the time. I do fall asleep like 9 o'clock. I'm exhausted from the day. And then I wake back up probably around 1.
Yeah.
I think we've texted one another in the middle of the night, and like all of a sudden you're up too.
In that trial. Yeah.
Yeah. When we were in that trial. So let's talk. Okay. We must talk. So you left the homicide unit, retired from the DA's office right after we had that case, People versus Nairi, Jose Nairi. And there was a co-defendant that we tried as well, People versus Hanley. Yep. Kyle Hanley, his co-defendant. They are both in prison now.
Yep.
And there's a lot of shows out about them. And that is, in fact, one of the chapters in your book, in your new book.
Right.
So let me back up. What year did you retire from the DA's office?
I left in August of 2019. So it's 5 years ago, almost exactly. And I cannot believe that much time has gone by.
Isn't it crazy?
It's just crazy. So August of 2019, so 26 years as a DA. We had an election in Orange County. I figured 17 years is a long time in that unit, having done it, especially the way I was doing it, like the everything else, just let it all sort of, Anyway, so I signed a deal with ABC News in New York to do legal analysis for them. And they've been great to me. So
I've seen you. You look great. You sound amazing. The voice of reason within all that. I love it.
Yeah, I don't know how.
So you're like a legal analyst on there, and you talk about the newsworthy cases, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So we got one this Friday. They're coming out, the Karen Reed case. It's going to come out tomorrow night. It'll be a subsequent 2020, but I just did a bunch of new interviews on that because that case hung. But all the sort of the cases of the day, the Koberger case in Idaho.
I saw you on the Idaho one.
Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. That was another crazy case out of Idaho, a bunch out of Texas and Florida, of course. A lot of that's been super fun, and they've been great. I left one team in the DA's office that I still miss every day, but I kind of joined another team at ABC, and the people at 2020 are amazing. And they're also, because they do crime, and they're interviewing family members, they kind of get it. I think that they get it, even though they're journalists. They're very, very professional. They call it straight. They're very good, but it's not. They're a really it's a really smart group, and they're in the conversations with them, they understand. And a lot of times, if you look at some of the interviews, like Mac Uppin went and interviewed Hussein Nairi in jail, right? And just he's not buying it. He's not believing anything that Nairi was saying.
Nor should he.
Yeah,
or anybody.
Or anybody.
That guy's so
That's right.
full of shit.
Yeah, I mean, he's a psycho. He's an actual psychopath, no doubt.
He is.
I think.
100%.
In my opinion.
In your humble opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I second that motion. So you do the legal analyst stuff. You have Matt Murphy Law.
Right. So I do very select criminal defense, which isn't the best business model for a criminal defense lawyer. I only want to represent people that I think are innocent. Not the best way to go out and make a bunch of money. So I've been really choosy about those, but I've gotten to help some good people, and I've enjoyed that a lot more than I thought I was going to.
Me too, Murphy.
Right?
Me too.
And especially in the lower ranks when we were baby DAs, you can overfile a case and charge stuff that you think is true or run in enthusiastically. I've certainly done that before, without maybe understanding the big picture. And there used to be a sign in Muni Court. In Central Muni, when I first started, that was on the cork bulletin board on the back door. When you go out of Muni, which I guess now is the panel, but back in the olden days, like there was that back door.
Yes.
And the sign said, "The young prosecutor should always remember and never forget that their power over the lives of the people they're about to go discuss is directly inverse to their own wisdom and life experience." And I thought that was great. In other words, don't be an idiot. Like, you can destroy people's lives who might not deserve it.
100%.
And that was the way the office used to be. That was the philosophy under Mike Capizzi, and to a large extent, I think, under Tony Roukakis too, the DAs that we worked for. It was always about do the right thing. Nobody's above the law, and that was good. That was good for us, I think.
Yeah, we had a lot of discretion and the
a lot of
ability
discretion. You can make
to make
call,
judgment
right?
calls. Especially when you got further along in your career. You know, you've been there 20 something years. And
you get a little bit of wisdom. You really do. You pick up some wisdom over time. I think we all do as we get older, but especially like understanding the relative seriousness of cases. And I think that we always used to fight for the victims, but I think that, like in misdemeanors, for example, you got plenty of people that can be perfectly decent who made mistakes, and felonies less so. Sexual assault, nah. And then in homicide, back to some situations where you can have a decent person who had a horrible, horrible night. But for the ones that we were doing, generally, to intentionally take the life of another human being, you gotta be an asshole basically to do that, and most of them were, I think. So
100%. So speaking of that, in addition to all those other things we've just discussed, you have written your first book.
I did.
And tell us all about this book. It's called The Book of Murder.
It's called The Book of Murder, and The Book of Murder: A Prosecutor's Journey Through Love and Death. And basically, it's kind of part memoir, part instructional manual for maybe a young prosecutor, and part sort of true crime breakdown. And essentially, it is some of the more interesting cases that I did in the 17 years. I explain the law of homicide. A lot of people in the true crime world, they love it, they're interested in it, but nobody really gets that breakdown on what is a first-degree murder versus a second-degree murder. What does special circumstance mean? What's the difference between a death penalty case and a case that's not a death penalty? How are those decisions made? Like, how are investigations done? How do prosecutors work with detectives? And I explain a little bit of that, and I try to make it semi-smart, at least. And then along the way, I tell a whole bunch of stories about the cases that we did, including Nairi. That what a prosecutor has to be concerned with, and really at the end of the day, it's always about doing the right thing. And, if you have a doubt about something, how we got to dismiss it right away. And if you got to make sure that criminal defendants are treated, with fairness, just like the victims are treated with fairness. But when the truth is they did it, and it's an absolutely horrible murder, sometimes the job is going in and making sure that after the defendant is treated fairly, that you go into court and you kick his ass. And you make sure that the jury understands the enormity of what they did, and that the defense loses. And when they call expert witnesses that aren't necessarily being honest, that you do the work to make sure that they're found out. And so that I get into all that in the book. And,
wow.
And then I interweave it with my disastrous love life that you're familiar with. That
I'm
like the opening scene. You remember Jen, of course. I almost got married.
Oh, your wow story.
Yeah,
that's in there too, Murphy.
It's so it starts with me belly aching in the
belly aching. Oh, she doesn't love me anymore.
I go surfing. I surf at home in Manhattan Beach most mornings, and so this was middle of winter, and it was my first week in homicide, and I'm again not sleeping, but for completely different reasons. It's when I found out she got engaged to her current husband, and awesome father to her kids, and great guy, like my buddy Greg Maffei, who knew them both in college. So people understand, I was with her for 5 years. We broke up. I figured we were going to get back together and then get married, and instead, what happened was she started seeing somebody else almost immediately. Yeah. And wound up marrying the guy. And my buddy Greg Maffei, who I went to high school with, who's still one of my best friends, and who does not, they say, your best friends because they stab you in the chest instead of the back. He came out to me and when I found out they got engaged, and he goes, well, dude, he's just like you, just a little better in every way.
Ouch! Oh, that hurt. Throat punch.
Which is but it's true. The guy's awesome. And anyway, so I thought we'd get married. She got engaged to this other guy, and I'm just like, my brain turns into a bad country song, right? Like,
oh, I remember.
Oh yeah, you remember, right? It was
that was right around the time when I met you.
It wasn't dignified. It was not dignified in any way. Like, anyway, I'm doing a surf session, and I get out, and it's I get back to the parking lot, and I get my first call out, and so it kind of starts there, and it morphs into that. Yeah.
And I know of a ton of cases that you've handled over the years. It's all fascinating. I mean, I don't even know which story to ask you about. So just give us a little teaser on the book. So
sure.
Nairi is okay. So
Nairi is the final chapter, final case. So I start out with the Samantha Runyon case. Some of the behind scenes on that. She was a 5-year-old girl kidnapped and murdered by a man named Alejandro Avila, and that was right after I got into the unit. And I talk about my first jury trial was a Russian gang hit in the city of Costa Mesa. Then I talk about some some street gang stuff that we were exposed to. I have a whole chapter on gangs, and in gang cases, sort of counterintuitively, once you get past the culture of it, which is kind of interesting, the murders themselves are sort of boring in a way, especially when your victim is a dead gangster, because a lot of people in those communities, especially, they feel like those are two for ones. One guy's going away and one guy's dead, and it's, for the hardworking people that live in some of those neighborhoods, that's a win. But then I talk about Rodney Alcala, the dating game killer, all the behind the scenes on that, which I think is very interesting.
Very interesting.
That whole case is really interesting. And it's a cautionary tale too, because that was a guy who back in the 70s kept getting arrested and released and arrested and released, arrested and released. And he was a beneficiary of that revolving door justice system that California seems to be going back to right now. And he was arrested and prosecuted for the kidnapping and near murder of an 8-year-old girl named Tally Shapiro. And he was released from California State Prison after 34 months. And then he went on and murdered about 100 people after that. So there's that case. Kathy Torres is in there. I go into...
was Wozniak in there?
Wozniak, the Daniel Wozniak case. Ed Shin. The Hawks murder out of Newport. That was the couple that was tied to the anchor and thrown overboard.
Give me just a little teaser on Wozniak, because I know these cases just because we worked together. But
Daniel Wozniak was a community theater actor. He lived in an apartment complex called the Camden Martinique Apartments in Costa Mesa, and he didn't have a job, and basically decided that rather than get a job and go to work, he would murder his war hero neighbor who had $60,000 thereabouts in combat pay from his service in Afghanistan. And this guy was a guy named Samuel Herr, my victim, and he was a genuine war hero. And he was at a place called Camp Keating, which is probably the most famous battle in all of the entire 20 years we were in Afghanistan. And he came back and he was getting his college degree at OCC on the GI Bill, and he had all this combat pay in his bank account, and basically he winds up going missing. And when police got into his apartment, they found the body of a beautiful young woman named Julie Kibuishi, who was also a student at OCC. She was 23 years old, and it looked like Sam had killed her and hit the bricks. And so we started looking into that, and there were just a bunch of little tiny forensic details that didn't make sense. Like, she had lividity on her. She was bent over his bed, and she'd been shot twice in the head, and there was lividity on her buttocks area, but the jeans had been cut off. So lividity, as you know, doesn't set in for several hours usually. So that made no sense. Like lividity and blanching were on the upper part of her body as she's over a bed. So it made it look like somebody came back hours later and cut the jeans off, which made no sense. So there's all these little tiny forensic clues that there was more to it. And basically, that's a whole chapter in the book. And Wozniak went and it was all part of his master plan to kill her and make it look like his first victim, Sam Herr, was responsible for that. And that's why he was, nobody could find him, yet he was,
mysteriously on the run
mysteriously
forever.
on the run, right? Mm-hmm. That was just a horrific case, one of the worst I ever saw. And so he murdered this beautiful young woman who hadn't even moved away from home yet. She lived here in Irvine. Well, you're in Lake Forest. She lived in Orange County with her parents still, who loved her to death. She was totally innocent, and he used her as a prop for a scheme so that he didn't have to get a job and he could go on a super bitchin' honeymoon with his fiance. That was quite a case. What
a diabolical a-hole.
Yeah.
I think wasn't her birthday too?
It was
celebrating her birthday?
It was Sam's birthday, the day they found his head, because they had Wozniak cut off his head in an effort to try to obscure his identity, which is also just stupid because the guy was a veteran and he's going to be in CODIS. His DNA is going to be there. So
that's crazy. That whole story is crazy, and there's a lot more juicy nuggets to that story too.
There's a lot to that.
You're gonna have to buy his book if you want to read about it, but it's in the book. It's all in this amazing book called The Book of Murder with Matt Murphy, and we can buy that on Amazon. We can buy that at Barnes & Noble, more importantly. Barnes & Noble.
And also doing a promotional thing with a bookstore in Manhattan Beach called Pages.
Okay.
Pages, like
Pages.
book pages. Pages. So it's pagesabookstore.com is their website, and they're actually selling signed copies of the book. So it's Disney Books, Hyperion Avenue is the publisher, and and that's been a really interesting ride, super fun. I enjoyed writing a book a lot more than I thought I was going to. So now we're on to the next one.
And what was just real briefly, what was the motivation for writing the book?
I miss it every day. I really do. I still miss it, and thought if I could share some of these stories, because the stories, if people knew what went on behind the scenes on these, like the murder cases themselves are fascinating, but also like some of the people, like the DA investigators that we got to work with, and these detectives and the crime lab personnel, they just never seem to get their due in my mind. So I wanted to write something that gave them credit for all their hard work, and so that I hope I praise them enough in this thing. But especially now, I really think that after the summer of George Floyd, police really they can use some kudos. The vast majority of them they're some of the best people I've ever met in my life, and
Amen.
So I wanted to write this thing and call attention to the professionalism that the good cops display day in and day out. So
I love that. And that's exactly what this podcast is all about, Murphy, is just bringing light to the people that help all of our victims in the midst of the darkness.
Yeah.
And my hat's off to you, Murphy, for doing it. I love that you wrote this book. I hope people go out and buy his book, The Book of Murder. And I know I read some of it and I thought it was amazing.
Well, I am happy that you're doing this podcast. Like the good guys need to get out there.
I'm going to bring all the good guys on here.
Yeah, the good guys need to get out there, and people need to know, because it seems like everybody who hates cops has a microphone at their at their beck and call to go and bash them. And
we're not here to do that.
No, for everybody else, for all the 80% of the rest of the people who just want to live in safe communities and understand that police are human, but they're there. They really are. They're heroes, most of them, and they're not all, but in my experience, most. And they need the good guys need to speak up. So I'm glad you have this podcast.
Well, thanks, Murphy. And I think with that, it's a wrap, because I know he's so busy. But Murphy, I can't thank you enough for coming on.
Super fun.
I think the moral of this is, if you can't find the light, be the light. Thanks for coming on today. We'll see you next time.